Hello, everyone. If there are still people outside, please come in and we will start now. So first, my name is Dorothy Guerrero. Many of you here know me as Dottie. I'm Head of Policy and Advocacy with Global Justice Now. And on behalf of the rest of my colleagues, Global Justice Now people, I warmly welcome you to this event this morning. There are also people that are following us on Zoom. So I also wanted to greet everyone who are on Zoom. I was told there is also a watch party going on at the moment in Edinburgh. So also welcome to those that are attending the watch party. They have popcorn actually, so don't get too jealous. So this is exciting because so far, I think this is the biggest face-to-face event that we've organized, and that many people say that when they received the invitation, they were actually happy that we have the theme that we are discussing today. Actually, it is not new for us as an organization. Tackling corporate power is sort of, it is an overarching theme in all of our campaigns, be it our campaign on just trade or our campaign on people's vaccines and against big pharma, against big corporate fossil fuel conglomerate, or our campaign on climate justice. And also, we are also part of the global campaign on the UN binding treaty on transnational corporations. So we work on transnational corporations in almost all of our campaign. We also see transnational corporations as a key driver of inequality, poverty, injustice, exploitation, and extraction globally. They're also the new empires. Welcome with open arms almost everywhere because they are seen as a bringer of progress, but as empires, they doesn't need to bomb their way in anymore because they're welcome. They could go to almost everywhere, anytime, and do anything with nothing or very little that governments can do to stop them or regulate them on their impunity. At the moment as well, the scale of corporate concentration is nothing like we've seen in recent times. And we are not just talking here about rate of profits. We're also talking here about the control of the mass of profits. And this control of the mass of profit is what really decides who the important players in the capitalist system are. And the important players are shamelessly using these insane masses of profits to corrupt politics, dominate the media, to buy elections, even to redefine what is common sense. That's why we also needed to stop Google, Facebook, and so on. Even leaders of Western countries are also finding this concentration of power alarming. Change will not come automatically and without effort. Therefore, we see it as our obligation to play a role in building a movement for change and ensure that change is transformative. And we also see it as a form of dismantling and entities that are enjoying such masses of profits. So we've called this conference not to say that we have all the responses or we have all the answers. In fact, we think that movement building against monopoly control of our economy and society is crucial to it. It is crucial to say, too, that in addressing monopoly capitalism, we are addressing not just the adjective, we are addressing the noun itself. So in other words, it is time to expose and challenge capitalism itself at its core. As Rosa Luxemburg said, we must build assistance to the dehumanization that is integral to actually existing capitalism. There are those who say that crisis signal the end of capitalism, but we also see how crises become the means for the reorganization of capital. We need to remind ourselves how crisis also grew from decades of flawed, inadequate responses to systemic problems. I hope that this conference inspires you and inspires you also to work with us in fundamentally changing power relations in society and the conditions of everyday life, whether your concern is on the ecology and environment, or trade, or human rights, or food, or unequal relations between race, gender, and class. I'm very happy to see many young people in the room as well. because the mobilization of people actually rely very much on the radicalization of the youth. So I hope that this will be the start of many conversations and debates and campaigns together. Enjoy the day. I hope it leaves you inspired. Thank you very much. So now I would like to give the floor to our director, Nick Dearden, to introduce the panel and also say more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dottie. Yeah, my name is Nick. I run Global Justice Now. For those of you in the audience, it's lovely to see you. A quick bit of housekeeping, which is fire exits are there. And for folks on the stage, over there. And there are toilets on this floor down at the end on the right. For those of you online, welcome too. You will be able to ask questions and even chat amongst yourselves online. And we have a member of staff monitoring the chat who can help answer those questions. And if you ask a good enough question, we may get it read out and put to our panelists. And of course, people in the room will also be able to ask questions after you've listened to the excellent speakers that we've got on the panel today. I want to start with a quote. We're now 40 years into the experiment of letting giant corporations accumulate more and more power. I believe that experiment has failed. Those aren't the words of a kind of radical anti-globalization activist, but of the President of the United States. Not somebody even from the left wing of the Democrat Party, but very much a centrist from the mainstream of that party who spent much of his life backing corporate trade deals. So the reason I'm starting with that quote is I think it shows something really big has changed in even how the most powerful Western leaders conceptualize and think about the global economy. And that gives us an immense opportunity to push for precisely the kind of transformation that Dottie was talking about. There is a recognition now that the free market hasn't led us into some form of consumer paradise where everything's available to everybody at a price they can afford, but rather a dystopia of corporate control reaching deep into every part of our lives, creating obscene levels of inequality, undermining our democracy and fueling catastrophic climate change. And that is what we need to fight for our very survival on this planet, but also for the kind of fairer society that many of you in the room have spent a good part of your life pushing for. So in the first session, we're going to try and get a lay of the land, a bit of an explanation. It's too loud? It's too loud. An explanation of what monopoly capitalism is, what it looks like, how it affects various parts of our society and economy. And I'm really pleased to have on the panel three excellent speakers. Parminder Jeet Singh, who's joined us all the way from India, who's the Executive Director of IT for Change, who has spent much of his life challenging big tech, the role of big tech in our economy, probably that bit of our economy that we most associate with monopolies. Parminder's going to be focusing on that today and also looking at the increasing role of AI over our lives and the corporate control of that technology. We've got Julia Kosgei, who is a policy advisor for People's Vaccine, a very big coalition that we are very proud to have been part of over the last 3 years, which has challenged the control, the power of big pharmaceutical corporations during the pandemic and has tried to wrestle that important knowledge out of the hands of big business so that we could produce more vaccines and COVID medicines and distribute them more fairly. And then, of course, Pettifor, who I'm sure needs no introduction to many of you, former head of Jubilee 2000 and one of the foremost heterodox economists in our movement. And Anne is going to speak, as you'll expect, about the financial system and of course, big finance, which is in many ways subject to monopolies itself, but plays a fundamental role in driving the system of monopoly capitalism. So without any more ado from me, I'd like to hand over to our first speaker, Parminder.
Thank you, Nick. As Nick said, I'm Parminder from India, from an organization, IT for Change. Every generation believes that they live through the most interesting times, and every generation of activists believe that perhaps they're living through the most crisis-ridden time. I would not be able to buck that trend as much as I would like to, and I'm trying to today share with you how I think is both most interesting time and most crisis-ridden time from the perspective of what may be called as digital capitalism or digital society. So one thing which though does not change is that since human beings got so-called civilized, that a set of people, some groups would organize themselves, conspire among themselves, and structurally arrange themselves to exploit the rest of them. And that's kind of a constant throughout our so-called undercode civilization. At different times, they organize themselves in different means, use different ideologies, principles. In the feudal age, it was the ideology or the myth of blood. Some clans would get together and they have some superior blood or some group of people of superior blood, and they thought they could rule over others. And then capitalism was about use of accumulated wealth to organize means of production, and then the relationship of labor with it, and so on. You all well know. So what I'm trying to propose today is, in that sense, that we stand at a time that we have a very new kind of society and a new kind of organization of the dominant groups to exploit the rest of us. And try to highlight my point, I would try to contrast it as saying that this is something very different. Later on, we may also talk about how it's similar, but here I'm going to talk about how it's very different. In industrial age, it was industrial capital which was exploiting labor. But what's happened today, and what's the nature of capitalism and what's the nature of capital today, is what we at IT for Change call as intelligence capital. It's not AI, it's intelligence capital, which is the real socio-economic thing. AI is a technology. And in between the industrial capital to intelligence capital, there was a time of intellectual capital, the intellectual property thing, and then there was a financial capital, which I'll just go over, not talk about it much. But what we are in today in the age of intelligence capital, and what is intelligence capital really? Now, what do you think the big companies you know as big tech are? Let's take Uber. Uber is an archetypical example of what big tech does, or Amazon is a second one. These companies, some people think they're big tech companies. They provide technology to us. Now, they don't actually provide technology to you. Amazon does not send technology to your homes, right? And neither does Uber. Uber sends old-fashioned cars to your homes, which were already there when Uber came in. So they don't provide you technologies. Now, technology provision may be made in some tech foundries of Bangalore or London. There are companies who actually provide technologies, but big tech is not a technology provider, though it's called big tech. So we need to first understand what is the nature of the devil, of this beast, and try to understand what are these companies actually, before we can, of course, kind of try to fight against them, fight against their dominance. So neither are these companies technology providers, nor they are really service providers of the sector which they dominate. For example, Uber is hardly a transportation provider in a sense that they don't really own cars, right? And Uber is something which neither a commuter nor a car driver has ever met often. Neither Amazon really needs to have an inventory of goods. They just organize other people who manufacture things, others hold inventory, others are the logistic players who run to your homes and deliver things. But they don't do any of these things. So neither is Uber really therefore a transport company, nor is Amazon really a goods company, because they're really not dealing with those things which are goods or transportation. So neither they are tech companies because they don't provide technology, neither are those sectoral things companies, which is transportation or goods. Then what are these is our big issue. And that's what I'm going to trying to talk to you about. Now, what we say is that these companies are intelligence companies. Now, look at it. What do they do actually? What does Uber do? Uber's business is to collect data of the transportation sector and use that data to derive intelligence about that sector and use that intelligence then to organize all the actors and activities in that sector. That's what they do. They use intelligence to organize actors and activities in a sector. So as time comes when typically a London cabbie was supposed to know everything about London, about its districts and roads, no longer need to know that much. Neither he or she needs to know where people are. That's all provided by Uber. Uber just tells, get up in the morning at so-and-so, go to the airport. That's the density of commuters right now there. Increase your fare by this much because people are ready to pay at this point this kind of a money. All these things initially used to be the guy actually doing business who had those intelligence, but that intelligence is now outsourced into a system, which is Uber, which tells everybody, the actors and the activities, how they need to be done. So that's what Uber is. And if you really look at Amazon, Amazon exactly does that for goods. Actually, Amazon changes the price of goods a few times every year, every week. Now, I mean, I wouldn't go into that point that these are even not market-based companies because the platform is no longer a market. They do not follow the principle of open price, which is fundamental to what a market is. But let me leave that point. So what we are looking at are intelligence corporations. So our main business is to collect data of a sector, transform it into intelligence, and use that intelligence to organize that sector and monopolize the intelligence. They become kind of a brain of that sector. It's like the body is here, like bodies in India. Amazon is working in India. The manufacturer, small manufacturer is there. The trader is there. Logistic provider is there. They're running around like, zombies who don't have intelligence. They're doing the work, but the intelligence is in a server in the US who precisely tells, at this point, turn right, the house is next, and get up in the morning and do this. All those small things are being provided by that brain company. So these companies become the brain of that sector. So we have a Uber, which is the brain of transportation, then Amazon, the brain of e-commerce sector. And don't be surprised by the use of this brain because tech companies actually use the word brain. Waymo, which is a company, which is a Google sister company into transportation, say they don't manufacture cars. We make drivers. That's what they write on their website. The driver means they create the brain of a driver. That's their business model. The shell of a car is now a very low-level activity. They outsource it to car makers. The big thing is to make the brain inside the transportation system. Now, once you understand that these are intelligence corporations and we are dealing with intelligence capital, now we start to look at what are the dangers that we face. Now, we have talked about two sectors, and they're relatively commercial, transportation and e-commerce. What is happening is in rather early stage, as we go further, the way intelligence, outsourced intelligence, this is like our systems, the social systems allow the intelligence of that system. You can look at Amazon ecology, manufacturer, a shopkeeper, a logistic provider, they are the people and the intelligence resides somewhere else. And these are like that puppetry, somebody is moving those puppets. As we go ahead, this has become more intense and you can already start looking at it. But think of it, when this moves into other sectors which are more critical to our existence, health, we soon have a health brain company, which will control everything in the health. They won't have doctors, they won't have the machines, they won't have hospitals, but they will be the brain which would direct everything. That would happen in education, that would happen in agriculture. It's happening actually. They're preparing in all these companies. So we have Health Intelligence Corporation, Education Intelligence Corporation, and Agriculture Intelligence Corporation. So that's where we are moving, and this is the nature of intelligence capital. I think you need to pick some time out now or later and start to think about what does it mean when social systems outsource their intelligence. It's become like a social brain, but it doesn't reside within the community. It's not amenable to the controls of the community. And I must at this stage say that there's nothing wrong. Like we had machines which made our life simpler. There's nothing wrong if there's certain outsourced intelligence. For example, if we are Global Justice is trying to organize this conference, and if they had help with some kind of an intelligent system, which could tell Nick, okay, don't do this, not needed to do this, we can already do this, et cetera, that's not a bad thing. So it's not that AI or digital intelligence is how we call it, is a bad thing. But whose control, at what scale, and how concentrated that intelligence is a problem. And almost all of them today is both remote highly concentrated and in foreign shores, largely in the US or some in China. So that's the kind of world we are going into. And one more thing, that intelligence has this inherent tendency to concentrate. All kind of monopolies, whether it was intellectual property or before that industrial capital, they had tendencies to concentrate, but not as much as intelligence. Because intelligence is kind of a thing which tends to concentrate by its own. Now think about it. If my body had 2 brains instead of 1 brain, that would be very unwieldy, right? So 1 brain is always better. 1 control center is always better than 2 control centers. Many, many times. It's not twice better, but many times better. That's kind of the thing intelligence is. So intelligence quickly concentrates. It removes all competition in front of it. And therefore, we're facing a devil which is huge, scaled up, highly proclivity for concentration. That's what intelligence capital is. I mean, the quintessential institution of industrial age was factory, where production took place. And for the intelligence age, it's a platform. What does a platform do? It has a dual function. Platform connects to everyone and collects data all the time. You know that, Facebook, Amazon, everybody's doing it. It keeps on collecting the data. It transforms the data into intelligence and uses that intelligence then to control all the actors and activities in that sector. So that's a dual thing which it plays. Now, having spent this time trying to scare you enough about what intelligence capital is, I'll spend another 4 minutes or so to try to talk what can be done about it. And there is definitely, and as I said, this is kind of a technology, it's the power of a huge technology, no need to push it back and say it should disappear. Outsourced intelligence is a good thing. Many things we know it, personal assistance, etc., even the way we use Facebook, etc., this or any kind of social media, there are good things about it. And if they are in our control, is a pretty good thing. So there are a couple of things to be done about it. The first is the fundamental, the Marxian theory of labor was that industrial capital is powerful. And then he came up with this theory that after all the value of industrial capital is basically contributed by labor. And the labor theory of value said, well, where did it come from? Basically from our labor, and therefore we can own it. Now, equivalently, all intelligence comes from data, which either you are the data subject or you are data generator. So all these data generators and data subjects can come up similarly with the data theory of value and say that all intelligence, which is a new kind of capital, is basically constituted of data which I or we gave, and therefore we have complete communal right over it. So there's this concept of community data, which Pettifor pioneered, and it's now a part of Indian government's policy documents. It started over there, and then of community AI. Now, I don't want to get into ChatGPT because it'll take another 1 session, but basically, instead of being scared, it's so powerful, we get scared and then we get paralyzed. And I think we don't need to get paralyzed. ChatGPT is simply a beast which eats up all the data which we generate, which is published on internet, etc., and then throws out things which we had actually given it to them in some other form. And we can lay the claim that this is basically the intelligence behind ChatGPT is to be owned by us. Now, one is to do fundamental work at legal levels to say that there is a community data, which is the data which we generate and we own, and then the community AI, which all this AI has a community claim over it. So we need to talk at the level of how land rights or knowledge rights were created, and this is possible to create data and AI rights. So that's one big part. And the second part is breaking up big tech. Now, breaking up big tech needs to be done at many levels. So there are at least 4 levels which it can be done. One is that in industrial age, many of the economic activities were public infrastructures. Roads, ports, banking, finance largely were public infrastructure, on the top of which private businesses took place. But in the case of digital, the main reason of the power of the digital big tech is that they vertically integrate all layers, which should be infrastructure layers to right service providing to the consumer. So one is to claim some layers of the digital as digital public infrastructures. I don't have time to go into it. Second, breaking up is to break, and there is again some work Pettifor Change has done, to actually say that, okay, whichever companies collects data would not be the company which translates the data into intelligence, that those companies which make intelligence would not own cloud computing, and those who directly provide services to consumers are then the ones who would provide the intelligence conversion. So it's possible to break it in this manner. And the last breaking up, which is as important, is we have to localize it into countries and to communities. This counter cyclical policies have to be put in. We have to have deliberate circuit breakers, because I spent much of my time to describe how powerful this phenomenon is. And it's that you already know how powerful it is. The only way it is to actually create circuit breakers. National level circuit breakers means we have national AI economies rather than a global one. Community level circuit breakers. So localize AI economies. And if we do that, it's very possible to take control of them. And therefore, we should start a campaign to break up big tech, which possibly we will speak more about during a workshop which will follow this. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Parminder. I can't believe how much you covered there. That was fascinating. I'd like to hear more, and we can, because you'll be speaking at a workshop a bit later. But for now, let me pass over to Julia.
Thank you, Nick. I think Parminder started by something that I feel true to my life. I feel like I'm living in interesting times, interesting and challenging times, because of the pandemic that I have experienced in the course of my life. I'll start by saying, because we're talking about monopolies, it's very interesting to me that pharmaceutical industry is more profitable than the energy and the financial sectors. It's mind-boggling that treating people, making medicines available is looked at as a money-making initiative as opposed to a saving lives initiative. I'll take us back a little to the HIV pandemic, which by the time I was born, HIV was still, had the number of cases had started going up. I hope most of you have a bit of history about HIV. In the 1990s, my continent, Africa, I come from Kenya, was ravaged by HIV so badly, so badly. There's no household that you could walk to that you could not find one or two people had been infected by HIV. I think most of the people I grew up with either lost a parent, a sister, a brother, an auntie, a grandparent. That was the reality of the situation that we were living in at that time. At that time, there were 3 drugs that were available to manage HIV, but these 3 drugs were owned by 3 different companies, and the cost of buying these drugs for 1 year was equivalent to $12,000. This was not affordable to someone in Africa. This was not affordable to, say, an auntie or an uncle of mine. In Kenya shillings, that is equivalent to 1.2 million Kenya shillings. That's almost somebody's salary at that time. So, Cipla, an Indian generic manufacturing company, came up with a cocktail of these 3 drugs and, made the cost more affordable to equivalent of $1 a day, which is affordable to somebody in Kenya, affordable to someone in Lesotho, affordable to someone in Morocco. But then this big pharma, we're taking their money away from them with this $1 a day. So what happened? This GlaxoSmithKline, then it was called GlaxoSmithKline, went ahead and called Cipla a pirate and said, these are pirates, they don't know what they're doing. They've not conducted a research any day in their lives. This is how they were trying to make, to put this company in disrepute, to try and hoard this technology, to try and hold on to the monopoly that they had on selling these drugs. Nelson Mandela in 1996, 1997, changed the laws in South Africa to allow the manufacture of generic products, to allow the import as well of these products. That was a game changer. What happened next? 39 pharmaceutical companies banded together with the support of the US government and sued South Africa because South Africa had changed its laws. South Africa was looking towards making an HIV drug affordable to people in the continent. As all these things were going on, and then it was estimated that 24 million people were dying. But this was not an issue for pharmaceutical companies. They were ready to let millions of lives get lost after this. But then activists like yourselves, activists around the world banded up together because $1 a day is manageable for most people around the world. And with all that campaigning, these companies waived the intellectual property, and this affordable drug was able to be brought to the market. And from that, now we know the story. We don't talk about HIV deaths now as we used to talk about HIV deaths in the 90s. Then came COVID, which we are all living that reality at this time. The lockdowns, loss of lives, nobody knew what was happening. But then governments came together, funded R&D for vaccines, funded R&D for treatments. And then what came about? Vaccines came about. The first, the 91-year-old lady who, I think Margaret, who was vaccinated was from Coventry in the UK. We were all watching in the news, excited that, you know, times are changing now. From Africa, we were even banned from traveling to Western nations. We had to have these COVID passports, vaccination passports, all these things. We were the pariahs of the world because we did not have access to these things. That hope diminished with all these things that came about. With the inequity that came with the COVID vaccine, the WHO established a technology sharing mechanism, a mechanism where pharmaceutical companies that had been publicly funded could come and deposit this technology, and this technology could be distributed to manufacturers around the world to make the vaccine more affordable, more accessible to everybody, including myself. I was just speaking to Nick early today. When this lady got her vaccine in 2020, December, and most of the world was getting vaccinated then, I did not get that vaccine at that time. I had to wait because we were waiting for this mechanism that our governments had pulled into to procure these vaccines for us and distribute it to the rest of the global South. But Western nations had taken it. Why? Because they had the money to pay pharmaceutical companies for it. They paid more, they hoarded more, and left me and the rest of the global South to fend for ourselves. And that's how the vaccine apartheid became. But then South Africa and India came together and proposed a waiver of intellectual property to, ensure that the manufacture of these vaccines could be, increased, and manufacturers from the global South could produce it, and it could reach me, it could reach my grandmother, it could reach someone from Brazil, it could reach someone from Indonesia, it could reach someone from Philippines more accessibly. But Big Pharma is Big Pharma. Using the machinery that they have, lobbying governments, they blocked the proposal from these two countries, and we got a very limited waiver in June of 2021. We didn't give up. We did not give up and continued campaigning, because at the end of the day, yes, we have the vaccine, but still we need treatments for COVID. I have never, in as much as I've been in this movement, I have never seen one tablet that treats COVID. If I get COVID today, I keep saying it's me and ginger and lemon and whatever else people say is going to boost my immunity. I have absolutely no access to COVID treatments in my country. I have no access to self-test kits. My friend Joe, seated right here, is the one who normally buys some self-test kits and sends it over to me because it's not available in my country. That's the inequitable world that has been created by pharma monopolies at this time. So away from that, So there's this with the blocking of the TRIPS waiver by the big companies and the rich countries, UK being one of them. We settled into now fighting for an extension of that limited waiver to include tests and treatments, because with treatments, you can always produce generics, the same way we got generics for HIV. But then what happened? The US came in December, right when we were expecting this big news of the extension of this waiver to include treatments, and hopefully I would now be making a different presentation saying now we have these treatments, etc. That didn't happen. The US blocked this. They said they needed time to investigate whether this is feasible or not. As they're making those claims, I'm still here talking to you, telling you I have no access to treatments. There's someone who has COVID, who, now we have long COVID. They have no access to that. And it's not just us. Things are really bad in the global south. And just to show you how profitable selling to the rich nations has been, Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, and Sinovac, the big tech company, big pharma companies, have made a total of $90 billion US dollars from COVID-related products between 2021 and 2022. Pfizer has made 35 billion in net profits. BioNTech and Moderna each have made 20 billion. Sinovac has made 15 billion. The 20 billion, Moderna's revenue in 2022 alone is equivalent to the combined health budgets of 68 countries. That's how ridiculous and astronomical Big Pharma's profits is. We blame the lack of inclusion of access conditions to public funding for R&D, because if this was embedded right from the beginning, we would not be having this discussion. They would have shared their technology with the available technology sharing mechanisms that had been set up, and would be speaking something different. We would not be talking about vaccine tests and treatments apartheid. I would not need to have a COVID vaccine passport before I traveled anywhere. The privileges that people in the global north had would be the same privileges that people in the global south had. But this does not stop with COVID. Big Pharma does not care about diseases that do not make profits for them. Currently, the World Health Organization has listed 20 diseases as 20 conditions as neglected tropical diseases. These are diseases that don't affect people in the north. These are diseases that affect people in the global south. An example is leishmaniasis, mycetoma, dengue fever, sleeping sickness. They don't care about these diseases. Why? Because they feel there's no money in them. And we are left to try and solve the problems on our own. At this time, antimicrobial resistance is also another, the next pandemic, if you ask me. In 2019, 1.3 million people died from antimicrobial, antibiotic, drug-resistant bacterial infections. That number in 2019 was higher than the people who died from HIV and people who died from cancer. But still, it's not enough to make big pharmaceutical companies invest in these diseases. And just to sum up, Parminder has talked about the big brain and big tech. Pharmaceutical companies are also leveraging on big tech and leveraging on it to, figure out how to price their commodities. How are they going to, and what diseases to invest in, and how to, identifying blank spots on their monopolistic tendencies. Which space have we not, filed for patents? And this continues to exacerbate the current problems that we have. And I'm afraid of the big brain that you're talking about, Parminder, because it means things are going to get worse before they get better. I'll close by calling you all I am a child of, I was orphaned by the HIV pandemic in the 90s. Both my parents died within 11 months of each other. My mother died in 1999, my father died mid-1998. And they died because they did not get access to HIV treatments. Then the only treatments available were those that were $12,000. We could not afford $12,000 then, because it would mean we had to raise $24,000 for them to get the treatments and for them to be alive today. Luckily, there were people who were able to survive and were able to get the generic treatments from CIPLA and now are able to, they have a better life than the life that I lived. My 4 siblings and I had a hard life because of what pharmaceutical companies, a monopolistic regime did to us. We are collateral damage. They don't care about people in the global south. This has been evident. This was evident in the HIV crisis. It's still evident in the COVID-19 pandemic. My cousin lost, we lost my cousin, a young woman who left behind 5 children because she did not have access to COVID-19 vaccines. And by the time she was dying, people in the global north had been vaccinated 3 times. That is how terrible our lives are, because of big pharma, because of their monopolies, because of their patents. But with activists like you, joining voices with activists like ourselves through Global Justice Now, calling for a people's vaccine, calling for people's treatments, calling for people's tests, and pushing the government to better prepare for a pandemic that does not only think about people in the global north, but also thinks about people in the global south. And equitable access to all medical countermeasures will be something that is going to change the next generation. And the next generation will not live an orphaned life that I did. And the next generation will not live without mothers the same way my nieces and nephews are going to live their lives. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Julia, for that and bringing your own personal experience in, because it shows us that this isn't just monopoly capitalism, isn't simply an abstract economics, but is life and death for many people in the world. And I think, gives us all the motivation to keep going with what we're doing. And we've got our work cut out because we have a government that, at the time of the COVID vaccine coming out, said it was capitalism and greed that was responsible for the vaccine, which is a million miles from the truth. It was greed and capitalism that were responsible for the pharmaceutical apartheid that came out in terms of the distribution of those vaccines, but certainly not from its creation. Anne, are you going to go up there? Okay, great. Anne Pettifor.
Sorry, I have to stand up because I have to wave my hands around when I speak. And I can't do that sitting down. So thank you very much. First of all, it is such an honor to be here with you, to be with my hero, Nick Dearden, but also to share this very distinguished panel and very moving panel. I feel I'm really very privileged. Now, I have an awful lot to say to you, and Nick says I've only got 15 minutes. So I'm going to just, if I may, plug my Substack post, which is called System Change. So if you just plug in Pettifor System Change, you'll get the story, because I'm busy writing all this down, and it will be published probably tomorrow. So if I miss things, or if it all sounds obscure, that might help. Wow. So first of all, I want to begin by saying that we are living in an extraordinary historic moment. And the stories that we've heard already, we should not despair. Well, maybe we should despair, because there's an awful lot that's wrong about this historic moment. But we should also understand what's happening in order to use it as an opportunity, if you like, for change, for transformation. So what's happening at the moment is that the tectonic shifts of financialized global capitalism are beginning to shift wildly and to cause massive instability to global capitalism. Now, and how did all this begin? Well, it began with central bankers, because central bankers who were governed, if I may say so, not by objective economic facts or reasoning, but by ideology, began to worry about inflation. And so they should have done. Wars create inflation, and what big corporations do is to engage in commodity market speculation. And it was speculation that at the very hint of the invasion of Ukraine led markets, global markets, to take a wall of money, if you like, and aim it at finite resources like energy, grains, and other commodities in global markets based in Chicago, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, right? So this happens out there, these commodity markets, and they're more or less out of control. What happened, thanks to deregulation introduced by the Clinton administration, they are allowed to throw enormous sums of money at these finite assets. And when you do that, you inflate the price of those assets. And that's what then caused inflation. But you know, if you take someone like Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, he believes, and he believes passionately, so does Larry Summers, a Harvard professor of economics, that actually inflation is caused by workers, by wages, right? So it's wage price inflation. So when Andrew Bailey was interviewed, he's on, by the way, he earns £575,000 a year as a civil servant on the government payroll. Don't let's kid ourselves, these chaps are not independent. These chaps and women are not independent. They are civil servants. When he was asked whether he wanted to inflict more pain on workers, his answer was direct. Broadly, yes, he said, in the sense of saying we do need to see a moderation of wage rises. That's painful. I don't want in any sense to sugar that message, he said. It is painful. And he used the ratcheting up of interest rates, which he thought would depress wages because it would depress demand in the economy. And that would cause workers to lose their battle, to raise their wages, to stay in touch, or to stay on a level, if you like, with inflation. Now, the context in which he argues that the workers are forcing up inflation is that wages in real terms are stagnating. Indeed, according to this TUC, this is the longest pay stagnation since the Napoleonic Wars. Real wages for millions are less than they were before the bankers' crisis in 2008. That's how disconnected are central bankers from the economic reality of what's happening on the ground. Nevertheless, they rushed ahead by forcing up interest rates. The Bank of England has ratcheted up rates 11 times since December 2021, and so is the Federal Reserve and the ECB. And they thought they were doing this to repress, if you like, trade unions and organized working people. What they've actually done is to destabilize the financial system. What they've actually done is to break up some banks. 4 banks in the United States have failed in the last week. One huge bank has failed in Switzerland, right? And in the face of that failure, in the face of that instability, the central banks, the ECB and the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve this week carried on ratcheting up interest rates. Absolutely extraordinary. And the link to what Parminder was saying is that the first bank to fail was the Silicon Valley Bank, right? And an investor in that bank, or sorry, a depositor in that bank was someone called Peter Thiel. Now, Peter Thiel, as you will know, was the first investor in Facebook, founded Palantir, but also PayPal, and then flogged it to eBay for I don't know how many billions. He's a very, very wealthy man. He had $50 million in this bank. And he and his pals had a WhatsApp group and were talking about this bank, and they noticed an important thing. And this is what I'd like to explain, which is that the bank had as collateral bought US Treasury bonds, US Treasury bills. But when they bought them at a time of low interest rates. So these were bonds that were earning low levels of rent, if you like, because interest is the rent on a bond, right? They were low levels, but they used those bonds as collateral to borrow additional monies, to leverage additional borrowing. So when interest rates rose, the value of those bonds fell because they were earning less rent, if you like, than the newly issued bonds, which were now earning rent at the rate of the new rates of interest. And what that meant was that the lenders to those depositors and investors began to ask questions about the collateral. This is just what happened to you if you had a mortgage and you had a house and your house fell in value compared to what you paid for it originally. The bank would come to you and say, look, if you flog your house tomorrow, you're not going to be able to recoup enough money to repay your mortgage. Give me more collateral. Show me more money. Well, that's effectively what was happening to Silicon Valley Bank. And what's so extraordinary about Peter Thiel, just to say in passing, is that he had $50 million in this bank, while he and his mates were talking on WhatsApp about the fact that it was likely to fail and that what they should be doing is pulling out their money. So they began to withdraw their money in huge sums. He didn't. What's $50 million to Peter Thiel, right? He left his money in there. And what happened was that when the bank failed, he should have lost. You know, his deposit should have been paid, should have been broken down, really. If you put your money in the bank and the bank fails, you lose. That's what a run on the bank is, when you rush to the bank to try and get it out in time. He didn't. He left it there. And the Federal Reserve said, don't worry, Mr. Thiel, we will make you whole. We'll make sure you don't lose your deposit, right? Now, that's extraordinary. It's extraordinary for a central bank to pay, to offer to buy people's assets, if you like, at par, at the price at which they paid for it, and not at the market price of that, at that bond. So I'm telling you this story because this is the basis of all the failure of all the banks, and more banks are going to fail for the same reasons, right? Huge banks. While I talk to you now, Deutsche Bank, which is this vast German bank, is wobbling. I'm not sure that Deutsche Bank will fail. It's better organized than Credit Suisse was, but nevertheless, the very fact, you know, that the shares in that bank are falling and wobbling shows you that actually this is a very, very big crisis of capitalism. And one would hope that the central banks would learn their lesson from this and would do something about, they're going to have to cut very quickly, but it's going to look terribly bad if they do. Anyway, I'm telling you all this because the system, as you know, is global and it's now wobbling. In my view, you know, it's at a dangerous level, basically, of instability. And we should be aware of that. Big tectonic plates are shifting. The destruction of Credit Suisse Bank required Swiss taxpayers to mobilize $100 billion in guarantees to UBS, which have taken over that bank. So that, you know, the Swiss taxpayer is now on the hook for this merger, right? And that's going to cause immense anger. It already is causing immense anger in Switzerland. So that's happening in one corner of the global forest, right? And is deeply disturbing because we've all got money in banks. We all depend on the monetary system. So that's happening in one corner of the bank, of the monetary system, of the globalized financial system. And then on at another level, there's a different movement of tectonic plates. And that is, if you like, the movement between the north and south. Let's for a moment just call it the south. Because this week, while all this is going on, and this is an event that really shocked me, 40 African countries traveled from Africa to Moscow to meet with President Putin and President Jeet, right? And they said that they were doing this almost as revenge on the colonial powers and the way in which the colonial powers had treated them. And I would think that the story about COVID and the big pharma is a big part of the reason that African leaders are in Moscow, were in Moscow on the 19th and 20th of March, this last week, right? But what that indicates is the big shift in imperial relationships across the world. The United States is losing support out there. It cannot buy up everybody. It can't buy every African government. And the reason this is happening, and I'm no apologist for President Putin or President Xi, right? Or indeed of some of the African presidents that are there. But the reason this is happening is that the United States has used its immense power and the immense power of the dollar to damage the interests of countries around the world. Now, it began by freezing the assets of Afghanistan and Venezuela, and nobody took much notice of that, because after all, you know, that's Afghanistan and Venezuela, and they're very poor and they're very small. But then they decided to freeze Russia's central bank reserves. Now, central bank reserves are a public good. They're a bit like the sanitation of a system of a country. They're a public good that is a consequence of the work, if you like, of the whole of the nation, good and bad, rich and poor. And there's international law about messing with countries' reserves. Nobody has much sympathy with President Putin, but it really was an injustice to freeze Russian central bank reserves in Western banks, right? They did the same to Iraq last year because Iraq was talking to the Iranians, right? So what we see happen this last week is China aligning itself with Russia, 40 African countries aligning themselves with Russia and China, with Saudi Arabia talking to Iran about resolving the war in Yemen, and Saudi Arabia talking to President Assad about resolving the war in Syria. And all this is happening because the South is beginning to organize against the huge imperial power of the United States and the dollar. This is huge. Now, how this is going to play out, I really don't know. We were in the green room talking about the good old days. I was in Tanzania in the 1970s when President Nyerere was president of Tanzania, when the values of our leaders in those times were something to which which were ideals, which was something to which we could aspire and support. We live in a world today where authoritarianism and even fascism is now a feature of governments around the world. So this is not an easy moment for us. For me, it just verifies what Karl Polanyi argued. And he argued correctly, in my view, that the rise of fascism and authoritarianism in the 1930s was a direct result of globalization. In those days, it was called the gold standard, right? Capital flowed freely across borders. Companies could make profits and exploit and extract assets from anywhere in the world and shift their money out as soon as they'd made those capital gains and those profits, right? And so they did this. And in the end, the market for money and in the market for other goods was global. It was different kind of global to what it is now, probably on a much smaller scale. But nevertheless, it stripped countries of autonomy, policy autonomy, democratic autonomy. And so what happened? The public rose up and they said, we want to be protected from this market that's made us unemployed, that's increased our costs and inflation, and it eroded our incomes and eroded our living standards. We want to deal with that market. And the leaders said, sorry, I'm going on too long. And the leaders said, sorry, But we can't do anything about the global markets. They operate independently of states. And the people said, in that case, we want a strong man or woman to protect us from the global market. And what we're seeing throughout the world now is the rise of authoritarianism as people demand protection from the velocity, the volatility of the international financial system. So we're getting our comeuppance, if you like, for this kind of capitalism. And I should stop there because I'm well out of time, but I really just wanted to stress to you that this is an extraordinary moment in our history. And it's happening as we speak. We need to think about how we react to that, how we organize, and how we begin to think about transforming the system. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. You see, I noticed you've gone over there to make it harder for me to, but I was also very interested. That was great. Thank you very much. But we've got some time for questions, which is always really nice. And we've got nearly 50 people watching us from all sorts of places: Norfolk, Newcastle, Livingston, and Peckham, apparently. So welcome. Welcome to you. I hope you enjoyed that. And we've got one question, but before I ask the question that's coming online, anyone in the audience? Gentleman here, start off. Keep putting your hands up. Yeah, we can take let's take a few. Yeah. So keep putting your hands up if you've got a question. Yeah, there's someone at the back there, guy. Yeah, please.
Yeah. Good morning, all. Sonny Ojaga here. I'm advisor. I'm a geopolitics and strategy advisor. So I run a company in Canary Wharf, and we have activities literally around the world with some of the major actors that you've mentioned. So thank you so much for your brilliant presentation. Very, very nice indeed. Very, very accurate. So I have a question. Personally, I believe that the solution to this capitalism is going to be geopolitical. That's what I believe, personal belief. But we've seen US impose unilateralism, and the global governance driven by the same US and allies for nearly 70 years now, causing there's a monopoly of capitalism because anything were edited by them, from WTO, World Trade Organization, or everything was just designed around the US dollars, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is a big topic. Personally, I don't believe that the same cause, the people who cause this or the institution that caused this, we're just going to wake up overnight and say, okay, let's stop everything because they benefit so much from it, and say, okay, now let's start afresh. Okay, I don't believe they're going to do that. So my question to you is, don't you think that the ongoing multipolarization and the global market shift that Madam, intelligently mentioned, the global market shift driven by emerging economies and symbolized by the BRICS is perhaps the historic opportunity we have to overturn this deadly capitalism? Thank you.
Thank you. Question up there at the back.
Thank you. That was all the speakers were so fascinating. I want to go to all the workshops simultaneously. So my question is just whether they are going to be sort of recorded so we can watch them afterwards, if we can't teleport ourselves to split ourselves in three. Thank you.
James could answer that question. Oh, go on then. Yeah, go for you, and then we've got Collier down.
Sorry, not wanting to miss out. When the ridiculous volatility that we're seeing currently at the moment in the cryptocurrency markets, and when that stabilizes, as it inevitably will, I'm wondering if the panel believes that cryptocurrencies will have a positive or a negative effect on both the climate and ecological emergency and indeed global justice.
Thank you very much. And then down here, right at the front, guy, I'm afraid.
Hi, thanks. I found that really interesting. This is for Parminder. It's more of a comment. I really like your sort of discussion of puppets and the central brain. And I think there's a really major implication for labor there, that basically it makes every single worker completely replaceable by another worker, because it's nothing to do with their skills as a worker. It's above them, which is something that then really basically pits every worker in competition with every other worker. And how do you break that? Because basically the minute you go out of line, the minute you do what the brain doesn't tell you to do, you're off. And so there's a very fundamental shift in how labor is being harnessed.
Thanks very much. And I've got two online, and then we'll come back to the panel, and then we'll have time to go out again. So two from friends online. Can the speakers say something about cross-sectoral collaboration across the different monopoly sectors and how to build the necessary coalitions that can address these issues? I guess that's a question for the whole day, but if you've got thoughts now on the basis of the first session, that'd be great. And the second question sounds like it's one for you, Julia. Can the pharmaceutical companies and the governments that have allowed them to effectively commit genocide during the COVID pandemic be made to serve appropriate sentences for the parts they played in these crimes? So a nice range of questions there for all of our speakers. Parminder, can I start with you?
So let me take the cryptocurrency question, the workers question, and the cross-sectoral ones. The cryptocurrency, I firmly believe, and we did possibly try to stop the Indians going forward with it, and were successful doing it, that cryptocurrency is something which is not a good thing. I think it should be, currency should be public and with the state, with all the problems we have with the state, the countervailing power which state has to the markets, the power of currency being with them is one of the major pillars of the state's power. And if that's taken away, we would be really in a very, very bad situation. So that's what I think of cryptocurrencies. Workers, the brains telling workers to do that. So it comes back to local controls, local community controls. What do we want the small brains to be able to do, what they are allowed to do? So to retain that control and break up big tech in a manner which retains enough efficiency, not the whole efficiency. We probably have to sacrifice a lot of it, which is fine. So it's a very generic answer, but the whole idea is to retain local control. And if something is made easier for the worker, that's fine, but not at the expense of the wages or the job of the worker. So the communities, the societies are still able to say that this is how that brains, which we work as our personal assistants or community assistants, rather than something sitting on the top of us, which is analogous to how markets are seen earlier. Markets were those big gods which sat above us, and it was explained by Anne how in 30s, 40s, when the market became very big, those things happen. Now, when the brain becomes very big out there, there's a similar kind of bad things would happen because human beings are human beings and they react in very, very different manners. So it's possible to retain smaller controls and smaller systems. Cross-cultural collaborations are very important, but I think it comes with specialization. Specialization and trust and across. So people specialize, but they know that we are doing the same thing in this sector as Julia is doing in the pharma sector, and the specialization proceeds along with collaboration. So that combination is very important. We shouldn't be blind to what's happening in the adjacent sectors, but then we also have to specialize. So that kind of a two-way thing is required. Let's stop there.
Well, I won't go into genocide because coming from Africa, that's a very painful topic. And but I'll say this: there's still time. There's still time to save more lives. There's still time for governments to do the right thing. You know, rich governments, the UK government, why is it not mandating AstraZeneca to deposit its technology to the WHO mechanism? Why is the US not mandating Moderna to deposit its technology to this mechanism? Why is Germany protecting BioNTech? There's still time to save lives. That's what I can say. And there are alternative models, and which we can talk more about at the next session, and as well as other mechanisms and other discussions around the world at the global space, at the regional space, that pharmaceutical companies, that governments have to redeem themselves from the mistakes they've made from this COVID pandemic, from the HIV pandemic. One of them is right now there's the negotiation of a pandemic treaty. What is the UK government doing to ensure that the mistakes they did during the HIV crisis, during the COVID pandemic, are not repeated? I come from a former colonial territory of this country. What is this country doing to protect me, not to further take from me from what they took, from additional things that they took from us from the past? So there's still time to redeem. Governments should push these pharmaceutical companies. Governments should ensure that equity is embedded in the global policies that are now being discussed. Thank you.
So I've had two questions. The one is geopolitical. The people who caused this crisis are not going to fix it. And I completely, I would go further. I would say they caused the crisis, and they caused the crisis because of their ideology. And their ideology is causing the system to break down, right? And they cannot shift from that ideology. And it's neoliberalism. It's about, there should be no friction on the movement of capital. Wages must be repressed. Capital gains are a good thing. Rent seeking is fine. Why on earth would you want to invest in making and doing things when you can just simply, this morning I had to deal with rented bicycles on pavements. You can just have a bicycle and then sit back and collect the rent and Uber and so on and so forth. Now that ideology is breaking itself, if you like. So the question then becomes, what is the demand that the South should make? And I think I would argue, and I should have said it in my speech, was that the thing we must argue for first and foremost is capital controls. If it's not possible for Big Pharma to go here and extract, precious assets in the way of herbs or whatever the basis of their research is, and mainly they're extracting assets, for example, from the Congo for iPhones and so on, and taking those assets, using them to make massive profits and capital gains, and then moving it away and out of tax, away from countries and into tax havens. They're breaking that system, and we should demand capital controls, because that would provide the friction that would make the kind of combinations that and the monopolization, if you like, and the oligopolization of capital much, much harder to sustain. So the question becomes, we're going to go through this crisis where capitalism eats itself in a way. That is going to be horrible. When it's happened in the past, we've settled it with a global war. And so therefore, I'm not saying this is hopeful. This is not at all hopeful. The question is, if we do have another war, and for God's sake, the Americans are really egging, and so are the Brits, egging for a third world war. The question then is, what are we arguing for? What do we advocate? What does the South advocate for? And I would say the South should advocate for capital controls, for greater autonomy, policy autonomy, and therefore greater democracy. And those are very, really difficult arguments to make in these current circumstances. But unless we're thinking about what kind of world we want, that becomes very different. Quickly on cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is absolutely central to the ideology. The ideology is that money is a commodity and that it's very scarce. It's like gold or silver. And of course, it has not been true since 1694 when the Bank of England was founded. Money is a social construct. It's an obligation. It's a promise to pay. It's you and I promising to pay. When I go to buy a coffee in the morning and pay £5.80 for it, I take this thing and I wave at the little machine. And then this debit card is saying, you can trust Anne Pettifor to pay £5.80 for a coffee. And what do? I take that and I put it back in my pocket. This is not a barter. This is not exchange. This is money, right? And money is this card that I have says you can trust Anne Pettifor to pay for her coffee, and I, the bank, am verifying that. You can trust her to make her promise. Now, the cryptos don't understand that. So they've invented this whole new thing, which they call money, which isn't money, but which is the biggest scam almost in history. And it has lost people millions of money. Poor little people. I'm South African. I go home, see my family in South Africa. They're not well off. You know, they're working people. And they say to me, Anne, I've bought crypto and I've made so much money. And they've lost the money, right? And I sit at the table and give them a little economics lecture. And they go, whoa, who's she talking about, right? So it's victimized ordinary people. And in Nigeria is huge for this. So all I'm saying is it's part of the ideology, you know, because that's really how mainstream thinks. The reason that central banks have tolerated this bizarre, awful thing that is crypto is because that's what they think too. They think money is a commodity and it is scarce. Anyway, I'm ranting, so I shall stop.
Thanks, Anne. I think we've got time for one more round. We'll do a quick round. Oh, we've got loads of people now. Now, this guy down here I saw earlier, so we'll take him first, and then you.
Yeah, this is a comment, I think mainly to Julia, but others as well. I was just thinking about Big Pharma and the restriction of HIV and COVID-19 drugs from global north to global south. But I was just thinking of something that happened in the 90s, which was exactly the opposite way round. One of the other big corporate bodies, the tobacco industry in the 90s, where as global north governments became much more restrictive and increased the price of tobacco products in the throughout the Western world to improve health, wasn't there a massive shift of cheap tobacco products throughout, flooding the global south? Sort of the opposite of what we were talking about earlier.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Food for thought this morning already. If global instability has led to the rise of strong men leaders who are pretending to protect their people.
And there's a couple of women in there too.
Well, I'll include them as strong men, if you like. Can you see any way of getting rid of them in favor of leaders who really do care about their citizens and work with them, and going even further, actually work with every other country in the world instead of fighting everybody? Can you see a way of doing that?
Can I just say one word? Brazil, Lula.
I think we've got one more question.
We've got more from Brazil. Behind you, Franklin.
Hello.
Any question?
Thank you very much. Alison here. Thanks for your stimulating inputs. So world population is aging rapidly, and by 2050, 1 in 6 people globally will be over 65. And this change to the dependency ratio, so the proportion of people who can work and grow food and pay taxes compared to the proportion who may need more care, has significant implications for people everywhere. So how do the panelists think that population aging will impact on the financial system, the health and pharma system, and the intellectual capital system? Thank you.
I think I might have to, I know there are a lot more actually, but I think I might have to close it at that. So I've got a couple more on from online as well, and you will get more chance to ask questions in the workshops, although not for Anne. The other question was about recording the work. I don't think we are recording the workshops, are we? No, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry about that. You're going to have to choose. I've got a couple here online that you might be interested in. Is it necessary for our democracies to challenge the control of information by the wealthiest, most influential groups? Another question, given the increasing military backing of monopoly capitalism, military spend and private armies, for example, can we talk about it as neo-imperialism or neo-colonialism? Oh. I think we probably can, can't we? But anyway, I'll come back to you all for maybe 2 minutes. Is that all right? Parminder? Anything there you want to take?
Apart from the questions?
You can also just sum up, yeah, whatever you'd like. But if you'd like,
the questions have largely been comments. I don't have much to say about it. Challenging control of information. Yes. I think, again, as I was saying when I was giving my earlier speech, that the common factor is that some groups would always organize themselves to oppress others, and the method changes around the key resources of that age, which today may be data and intelligence. Method changes according to the political situation and etc. So I think the common thread, which somebody was talking about cross-sectoral collaboration, and this is a great way to do what Global Justice Now is doing, is to be able to conscious of those struggles in the neighboring field while we specialize in our own. I don't have much more to say that. I can save space for my esteemed colleagues here.
Okay, for the tobacco comment, I won't say much, but shortly after the WHO came up with this tobacco convention that more or less tried to cover the public health concerns that came with the tobacco industry. So I just wanted to put it out there. On aging populations, I think, again, when you think about big pharma, I assume even in the global north, there are more supplements than I can dare to count. And this again goes to show, and I'm assuming again, big tech has a role to play in how they mine their data, how they choose what to prioritize, etc. But at the end of the day, I just again want to reiterate, there's still hope. Yes, a colleague here said it cannot be taken down in a day, but there's still hope. That one action today, another action tomorrow, another action the next day is going to make a big difference. Last year, there was, a compromise, not a compromise, a limited waiver that was passed on the World Trade Organization on vaccines. This was not extended to tests and treatments, but that was such a big shift and such a positive thing that gave us hope that there's still change that can be made. Right now, there are negotiations on a pandemic treaty. How can we embed equitable access so that you in the global north and me in the global south will have the same access to medical countermeasures at the next, if the next pandemic comes? How do we push our governments to ensure that there's public funding for diseases, including diseases that are not necessarily at the priority of pharmaceutical companies? Right now, I don't know if you know, there's Marburg fever at our neighboring country, Tanzania. Someone like me living in Eastern Africa, we are on high alert, but it's not a priority for big pharmaceutical companies. There are no treatments, there are no vaccines. How do we get these messages to the right people who can support financing, who can support R&D, who can support tech transfer? I'll stop there because I can go on as well for a while.
Thank you, Julia.
Right. I just wanted to answer the question on population. Well, not answer it. I don't really know what's going to happen, but I do agree with you that there'll be a big demographic change, and that is going to have an impact. And we haven't yet mentioned climate breakdown. What is that going to do to global capitalism, right? So, there are huge issues facing us and the world out there. And I'm not able to say how that's going to pan out, but we need to be aware. And as to military spending, these countries are at risk of bankrupting themselves. I mean, I think Joe Biden, who is promising to do something about big corporations, is also mobilizing a budget of something like $850 billion for the Pentagon, right? To declare war on China, or to show Trump that he's just as warlike as they are. So, this is not easy money to manage within the constraints on even the mighty US dollar. But I wanted to just end on this note. I'm here today because, we ran a campaign called Jubilee 2000. We had no money. We had no resources when we began. Our office was in a shed on the roof of Christian Aid, a shed that had plastic corrugated walls that didn't quite come down to the floor, right? It was very cold and drafty. So, and we had no money, and we started with nothing. And we ended up writing off $100 billion of debt owed by about 30 countries. And now that is small beer in the global economy. But it was the result of people teaching themselves, educating themselves on how the international creditor-debtor, sovereign debtor system worked, and then putting pressure on politicians and bringing about massive change. And that's why I'm here, because I'm not going to be despairing about this. I'm not going to give up on us people, because there's loads of us who are really good, and you know, we have strong values, we have powerful, wonderful values, and we can change the world. We just need to make sure that we understand these big tectonic forces that are going on around us. Thank you.
Well, what an amazing panel. That's one of the best panels I've ever chaired, I think. And not only that, you've been to time. I mean, I'm a terrible chair, and we're actually finishing on time. So that's incredible. Now, before we go into the next session, I have a quick shout out from two of our wonderful members of staff, Sam and Lilu.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I'm Lilu.
And I'm Sam. Hey.
That was not rehearsed.
Rehearsed.
But it's great to meet you all, and thank you for coming. We just wanted to make a quick announcement about Global Justice Now's Youth Network. So we work to support the Youth Network. It's a network for people who are between 18 and 30, and we have around 10 to 15 groups across the country.
And we also have a regular network of people who are older than 30, and we have about 30 or 40, maybe more groups across the country as well. So welcome to get involved in that as well. But just to focus a little bit on the youth network very, very quickly, because I haven't got much time, just to let you know, you're very welcome to get involved. We've got a stall outside, so come and chat to us if you're interested. What we've done previously is we've hosted solidarity events to fundraise for grassroots groups. We've held creative workshops where we've created banners and placards to take to protests and do that sort of thing. We do that together as a youth network or as a local youth network group in a particular city or town. We've organised actions across the country as part of Global Justice Now's campaigns, and that's the sort of thing that our regular activists do as well. We've organised with different grassroots groups across the world, including, you know, the global climate strikes and migrant solidarity demonstrations, gone on big demonstrations with them. And we also put on political education events, a bit like this, but specifically for younger people. So we do all that and more. It's an exciting space to be involved in and a great place to meet other like-minded people as well. So yeah, do come along and chat to us. We're just on a stall outside.
Yeah, and if you're based in London, we're having our next meeting on the 4th of April. It's going to be at the Global Justice Now offices. And yeah, feel free to come to the stall to chat with us. You might also be a professor at uni and like keen to start a group there, or like know other people, who are interested in the youth network. So we'll be there all day, and we'd love to hear from you and chat more.
Great, thank you.
And I also wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody who gave money to our crowdfunder to allow us to put this event on today, to bring over these wonderful speakers and to make it free for everybody. If you contributed, thank you. Whether you did or you didn't contribute, we also have people outside who would love you to join up to our organisation and become a member, because as Anne says, this kind of change is the kind of change we can only make as part of a mass movement. When people get involved and are driven by their passion and desire for change, we can change things. So please become part of our movement, part of our community. You can do that at any time during the day. And very, very finally, I'm going to hand over to James, who's going to explain what happens next. And I should say a huge, huge thank you to James and his team for putting on this conference today, because it's quite stressful doing this kind of stuff. So huge well done.